but your nature is timeless awareness, which is to say your nature, when you quiet your mind, you discover that you can move your center of focus out into the universe or into the future, and you discover that's who you really are. We did that correctly 9 weeks in a row.
Wow.
So this was not in Nature magazine. This was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. California firm has cornered the silver market because without air, we made $120,000.
These civilizations have technologies that pick up coherent, direct thought, not only innately, telepathically, but technologically, as easily as you and I are using a computer or a cell phone to communicate, which of course, to everyone listening, is at the speed of light. But the speed of light is too damn slow. Hello, everyone. I'm back. I'm Dr. Stephen Greer, and I'm here with Dr. Russell Targ. I'm very honored to have Dr. Targ with us today. He's coming from California on this YouTube Live special event for the premiere of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Contact has begun. And again, I'd like to give the great news that this documentary is now #1 worldwide on iTunes. That's just in a few hours. We've raced right to #1. And I'd like to thank everyone for making that possible. Everyone who crowdfunded this, we're right at $800,000 on the crowdfunding. And we've done you've all done a great job in making this happen for everyone who wants to learn about this. And I'd like to thank Dr. Targ because he appeared in this film. Those of you who've seen it already, some of you have. It's just released today. And he provides some really beautiful insights into consciousness, the science of consciousness, and the fact that this has been known for millennia in various cultures. So Dr. Targ is a physicist. I believe you were a laser physicist with Lockheed for some time, and then worked for the remote viewing projects with the CIA, and have some amazing experiments that you've been witness to. And I'd just like for you to go forward and share with the public your experience and your journey and what you discovered as a scientist about the nature of consciousness and thought.
Well, I'm very happy to be here to celebrate the release of your wonderful new film. I enjoyed that thoroughly and was happy to see people transcending space and time as you sat there with your laser pointer telling them where to look.
Beautiful. Yep.
The thing that I can tell you about is that I have now 40 years of experience sitting in a room with people and saying, somebody is hiding somewhere in the world. I'd like you to quiet your mind and tell me what it looks like where they're hiding. That's the instruction. There's no magic mumbo jumbo. Just quiet your mind and tell me the surprising images that will show up. And people can do that describing what's across the street in Palo Alto or what's going on in Soviet Russia or in China. And the most important thing that I can tell you as a physicist, what we discovered is that it's no harder to describe something thousands of miles away than it is to describe something across the street. Right. So modern physics call that non-local perception. But the most interesting thing that we discovered and been replicated in many laboratories is also no harder to describe something that's going to occur days or weeks in the future than it is contemporaneous. And many labs have shown that now, including Professor John at Princeton. And the best evidence we have that you can look into the future is that after I left SRI, I did a little experiment where we were forecasting changes in the silver commodity market. So each day on Monday, I would sit with a psychic in my kitchen and say, can you tell me, please, what I'm going to put in your hand next Friday, 5 days later? And that object would be determined by whether the silver market goes up a little, up a lot, down a little, or down a lot. And we did that correctly 9 weeks in a row.
Wow.
So this was not in the Nature magazine, this was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. A California firm has cornered the silver market because without air, we made $120,000. That was in the 1980s when $120,000 was a lot of money. But doing anything 9 times in a row is quite remarkable.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah. And that just shows that what's interesting is that while there are renowned people doing remote viewing, such as Ingo Swann, who's a friend of mine prior to his passing, and others, that in reality, every human being who is conscious and is willing to give some time to the practice of it and the study of it can accomplish these things.
That's a very important idea, that this is not unique to a few people.
Right.
In fact, after leaving SRI in the 1980s, I was teaching remote viewing all over the world, and many producers set me up in Japan or in Italy or in Stockholm. And the first thing I would say from the stage to the audience is that I expect everybody here will either do something psychic or see something psychic. If that doesn't happen, we'll give you your money back. And producers are often very shocked because they didn't expect that to happen. But in fact, as I would stand on the stage and lead people through an exercise, everyone would either have a psychic experience or observe that their nature had drawn or described something perfectly. And that's really an important idea, that this is a widespread ability. And as you said, this is not New Age. This was heart and soul of Buddhist teachings back before the time of Christ.
Right.
The earliest Buddhist writings by Padmasambhava and other Buddhist teachers, they expected you to be able to quiet your mind, see into the distance, see into the future, diagnose illnesses, and heal the sick. And that was not for special people. That's for anybody who learned to quiet their mind, locate the off switch, and discover that your nature is timeless awareness. The powerful teaching of Buddhism is not any dogma, any belief system, any stuff to do. Buddhism gives you control of your mind, shows you how to find the off switch, quiet your mind, and what you discover is that you are not actually made of meat and potatoes, but your nature is timeless awareness, which is to say your nature, when you quiet your mind, you discover that you can move your center of focus out into the universe or into the future, and you discover that's who you really are.
Exactly. And that's what I've experienced in training people all over the world to do CE5 is that a lot of people have this idea because they've learned it from our society and our religious institutions and teachers that you can't do this. And the first thing that people have to get over is this gremlin on their shoulder saying, I can't. I'm a dumb clump of clay. And so you kind of have to turn off that negative noise and voice that says you cannot do it, study and understand the nature of consciousness, which is why we included the science of consciousness experiments in this movie, so people see that there is objective data that shows that, in fact, as you mentioned earlier before we went live, that Erwin Schrödinger said, the total number of minds in the universe is one. It's a singularity. And that singularity is the true nature of every mind. And the conscious mind that is within each being, even though we may identify it with our ego and self, at its deep and quiet nature is this field of awareness that isn't limited by space or time.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Schrödinger had a nice way of putting that. He said that consciousness is a singular of which there is no plural. We're all connected together. Now, my interest as a scientist is in what we've been discussing, but we actually did this work for the CIA for 2 decades, and the CIA is not noted for their metaphysical interests, but each day or each week we would have to do some operational thing to pay the rent. So we did stuff like, the film that I made a film recently called Third Eye Spies that opens with Jimmy Carter thanking us for finding a downed Russian bomber in Africa. A Russian bomber went down under the canopy of forest in northern Africa, and we couldn't find it with our satellites because it was under the trees. But a remote viewer in California was able to quiet her mind, mark a map, and say, if you go there, you'll find the mountains are on the right, and before the mountains is a river, and then there's a village. Between the mountain and the river, you'll find the downed bomber. And the CIA then launched a helicopter with nobody's permission right into a clearing in the jungle in time to see villagers pulling wreckage out of the river. So we found something that no one else could find.
Wow.
And we did that for 20 years for the CIA.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating movie that you did, Russ, Third Eye Spies. I think it's up on Amazon Prime and other sites, and people should take a look at that because it's a really good review of not only the history of this, but the capabilities that people have. And I think it's really important that we begin to normalize this concept of what the nature of the conscious mind is, and not, take it out of the mystification and the sort of unattainability that you have to be, a swami on a bed of nails for 40 years or something. I think we need to I hate to say it that way, but I think we need to make it approachable and real for people. And I remember meeting with a State Department official some years ago who was asked to go to Australia, and I think this was maybe in the 70s, and do a trek with the Aboriginals who had something called dream time, which is when during the lucid dream state, they would see what would happen the next day or next week, and they would actually act on it. It was just part of their culture. And he went over there to do a study and an ethnography and to look into really how their culture considered this to be completely normal. And it was fascinating because I think I mentioned to you, and we were talking on the phone not long ago, that I met my wife in a lucid precognitive dream that happened 5 nights in a row. And I was only 22, and I was no more interested in being married than the man in the moon at that age. But I said, well, this is apparently, and then a few weeks later, I was in Israel in the Middle East, and she came as a Peace Corps worker to a convention there, and I met her. I said, that's her. Of course, I didn't go up to a complete stranger and say, hey, I had a dream with you. We're supposed to be married. But that was, 42 years ago.
Well,
married.
Right, back on the kibbutz, we say Mazel Tov.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, what I see on my screen, right over my shoulder, is a picture of a bunch of windmills, and right under that is a wonderful drawing of a bunch of windmills, and that was Joe McMoneagle,
right,
who was one of a group of Army officers that we trained to do remote viewing. And part of the idea that remote viewing is not a special ability that only a bunch of weirdos have. I had 6 Army officers in their leather jackets and boots come marching in my office for 6 weeks, and my job was to show each of them how to do remote viewing. And they were the key guys setting up a remote viewing program at Fort Meade. And in the picture over my shoulder, you have the blue sky, and then below that, we had a CIA agent said, well, I want to see this happen. So he said, I'm going to go hide somewhere, and at noon, Joe should describe where I am. And Joe made this super accurate description of a windmill farm, which is 100 miles east of SRI. And he did that for a decade. There was no decay, no fall off in his ability. In things like card guessing, which is a very boring psychic ability that was done for a decade before we did remote viewing, you often had a fall off in ability because people get bored into a decline. Right. There's absolutely no decline in remote viewing. People improve, like learning the piano. You don't get worse with practice, you get better with practice.
Right.
And what we found is that many of the people we worked with for a decade or more, improved their ability as they learned through their intellectual capability to separate the psychic signal from the mental noise. You have to learn to get rid of guessing and imagination and memory, which is a source of noise, and look for the psychic signal which appears in your awareness. And that's an intellectual discernment which people can become more acute and more skillful. So the fact that I can take a bunch of people who are interested and show them the steps, and at the end of a weekend, they'll all be saying, I didn't know I could do that. So I'm not, so my feeling, people often want to know, can I teach you, can you teach me how to do remote viewing? The answer is you already have the ability to do remote viewing. My job is to give you permission to make use of an ability you already have.
Exactly. And that it's such a great perspective, because that's what I've been a meditation teacher since 1974. And what I've found is that people have to have an affirmation, and maybe sometimes they need someone to sit with them and just tell them and share this, is that this is the nature of the consciousness you already have. You're not, people say, where do I have to go? You don't have to go anywhere. I said, and sometimes in an audience with a large audience, I'll say, let's look to the person right beside you. That person is awake, you're awake. And you each are conscious, even though you're unique people, like, two snowflakes, no two are quite identical. However, the light of consciousness, this conscious field, is a singularity. And so the light of awareness that you're sensing from the person next to you, and the light of awareness within yourself is one. Now expand that to the whole audience, and then to the whole city, or out to their Andromeda galaxy, 2.5 million light years away. Since there's no limit in space or time by the nature of consciousness, which has been proven in scientific experiments that you refer to and that we refer to in this movie, what happens is that when people begin to experience in a small way, a baby step, then they begin to learn that they can sit with others, go into meditation, and see what's going on out by Saturn or Jupiter. By the way, share with folks this cool story about Ingo Swann, because he was such a great guy. I loved being with him with the experiment he did with Jupiter.
Well, early on, in the beginning, I was at a conference on speculative technology, and Werner von Braun was there. Mm-hmm. And I had my ESP teaching machine, which is a 4-choice gadget that helps you develop your psychic ability, and that's available free from the Apple iTunes store, the Apple iStore. It's called ESP Trainer, and it offers feedback and reinforcement. So way back in 1972, I already had this gadget that I built at this conference, and von Braun did very, very well with that. He's a famous rocket designer, ran the American rocket program after he ran the German rocket program. But he did super well with my ESP game, and he took me and my game to the director of NASA, who's Jim Fletcher, and said, these guys just want $80,000 to start a program. I think we ought to get them started. So it was the fact that I coincidentally showed up at this NASA conference at St. Simon Island. Von Braun did super well with my game that we were invited to start a program. And Edgar Mitchell came to our conference with Charlie Anderson, and we started a program. So early in our activities, we had a NASA contract, and George Pesders, who was head of new projects at NASA, was sitting with Ingo Swann and me in my office. And he said, Ingo, I've seen a lot of remote viewing that you've done. We're going to send a Pioneer spacecraft to Jupiter. Could you tell us if we're going to find anything interesting there that we haven't seen before? And Ingo took a big puff on his cigar and asked me for a pad to write on. And he started drawing Jupiter and drew a big circle around it. He said, well, when you get there, you're going to find a circle of ice crystals around Jupiter. And George said, well, you're thinking of Saturn, aren't you? Saturn's the one with rings. Jupiter said, I've been looking at the solar system my entire life. Just believe me, I know the difference between Saturn and Jupiter. 8 months later, we got a photograph from NASA that remarkably resembles what Ingo had drawn, showing a single ice crystal circle around Jupiter that no one had ever seen before. It's too faint to be seen with a telescope, but it shows clearly in NASA's photographs, and the photographs greatly resemble what Ingo drew. And the point of this is that it took no time at all for Ingo to suddenly focus his attention 500 million miles away and describe what we're going to see on Jupiter.
Exactly.
Didn't have to meditate, didn't have to chant any mantras. You know, you want to look at Jupiter, I can do that. Give me a piece of paper and I'll draw you a picture.
Well, this is when I was talking to Michael Mazzola in the previous segment, I was mentioning to him that the process we're doing with Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, when you first come across it, you kind of have to learn, but you can go from doing the quieting the mind, remote viewing, and then we expand it to a vectoring connection to these civilizations where we zoom in and show them where we're located. It's sort of the reverse of seeing out. We guide them in. And that process, which some people find laborious when they first start it, can happen in 2, 3, 4 seconds. So often when I go out, I just connect to that aspect of consciousness, intend to see and connect and then show. And it's a very quick, but to get to where that is, you kind of need to practice. Like you said, if you're learning the piano, or I'm not very good with musical instruments at all. In fact, I'm a klutz. But my analogy is that it's a medical student learning to do a cut down on the throat or a chest tube or those kind of things. When you first do it, it's like, oh my God. But then after you've done it lots of times, or run a code blue and resuscitated someone and done all this stuff, there's a alacrity and an automaticity that it just becomes very effortless word, even though it sounds horrific to a layperson. So I tell people, as you practice conscious meditation, mindfulness, and do this, it becomes more and more natural. And I remember talking with Ingo about this, and he wrote me a beautiful letter where he loved what we were doing with groups of people connecting to this aspect of consciousness within a sort of a construct of contact and universal peace and some purpose. He said he really thought what we were doing was a wonderful application of what they had studied at a SRI. By the way, SRI, just to define it, I know you didn't, it's at Stanford Research International, that you had been with, and that it was sort of an application of that within a construct of the purpose of reaching out to these other civilizations within the framework of what I call universal consciousness, but also universal peace, that those grow from each other.
I agree with that. And we all have this ability. You don't have to be a Buddhist. You don't have to believe anything at all.
Right.
You just have to learn to quiet your mind with a teacher. The teacher basically shows you the moves. It's like,
yeah.
if you see somebody riding a unicycle, that looks clearly impossible. How could it possibly be able to ride that thing with no handlebars and one wheel? And if a teacher will simply stand you up, tell you what you're supposed to do, and give you a little push, you can ride away, and you go from being impossible to doing it. And the remote viewing is very much like that.
Exactly. It's beautiful. Yeah.
I enjoyed watching your film where you're pointing out with your green laser pointer into the sky, calling in a group of UFOs, which are tripartite to begin with, and the three of them merge together in two, and then the two merge together in one, showing that they're obviously outside of time and outside time and space. This is obviously a multidimensional project. They can certainly interfere with radar. You can see them on radar, but they also see something making use of either another dimension or a complex space-time. When it goes into the other dimension, it doesn't drift off the screen. It just gets smaller and smaller and disappears. And we think that psychic functioning makes use of a complex space-time, because in a complex space-time, there will always be a path through that space-time where there is no distance between you and the distant place you're looking at. There's no distance in time. So if you want to see something 1,000 miles away, 3 days in the future, just give me the instruction and Ingo can tell you what's happening. Basically, that happened one day. The CIA came in, and today we need to know what's going on at these coordinates, Ingo. And today is Wednesday. We want to know what's going to be happening there Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, without a moment's pause, he said, well, I see this beautiful pyrotechnic display. It looked like fireworks in the sky, and there are a row of trucks in the distance. And I got him some colored pencils, and he drew this bunch of circular arcs in the sky. 3 days later, we learned that there was a Chinese atomic bomb test at that location, and it did not go off. It was a failed atomic bomb test, which is to say, when you burn uranium in the air, it makes a pyrotechnic display. It does not make a mushroom cloud. So Ingo was able to tell 3 days in advance that at this distant location, there was going to be an atomic bomb test, which we, of course, did not know. And he was able to provide enough detailed information about this future event so that the CIA agents who are in the know could say, aha, it is going to be an atomic bomb test and it will fail. So Ingo was able to look 10,000 miles to the west, 3 days into the future, and make an accurate drawing of what was eventually seen.
Yes, right, exactly. So now imagine that capability being used with these interstellar civilization. I call it TDIS, trans-dimensional interstellar, because if civilizations that are a few 100,000 to a few million years beyond where we are, and after all, the universe is, if you believe astrophysicists' estimates, 13 to 15 billion years old, that's not much time. So civilizations that are thousands of years beyond us, their technologies are all by nature transdimensional, and their communication technologies are sort of a very far advanced version of what Elon Musk is wanting to do with his Neuralink company, where he's studying how to create a technology that picks up on directed thought and causes it to turn the computer on or do functions just through thought, not through wires. And so Neuralink is studying that. They hope by 2025 they'll have the first operational model. And so we tend to be very narcissistic and myopic. We have to think about what are the technologies that are extant in civilizations that are thousands of years beyond where we are, and where they have studied and perfected technological interfaces with other aspects of dimensions, space-time, subtle electromagnetic fields, and et cetera, and so on. And what we discovered is that these civilizations have technologies that pick up coherent direct thought, not only innately, telepathically, but technologically, as easily as you and I are using a computer or a cell phone to communicate, which of course, to everyone listening, is at the speed of light. But the speed of light is too damn slow. I know when I briefed the CIA director and his wife was the chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences, and she was intelligent enough to ask this question. She says, well, how would they be communicating across those vast distances? And I started talking about the science of consciousness, non-locality, that they have systems that interface with these other dimensions and thought as easily and precisely as we are using cell phones and television and radar and what have you, radio frequencies. And she looked at me. I thought she would be laughing me right out of the place. And she said, I thought it had to be something like that. But now the director of the CIA was more of an attorney and a apparatchik. It sort of went over past him. But his wife who is a scientist, really understood this. And she understood the fact that by nature, civilizations that are, whatever it is, 10 to the 5th, 10 to the 6th, 10 to the 7th years ahead of us, thousands to millions, they're naturally going to have evolved technologies that are going to look like magic. Because let's face it, if you went back and visited Thomas Jefferson and showed them your smartphone or this computer, it would be something from another, it would be witchcraft to them, in 1700s. So I think that's the other part of this, is that we have to realize that there's a certain amount of humility that kicks in here, where we have to realize that it's a vast cosmos out there. And it's likely there are civilizations that are extremely advanced beyond where we are. And all of their technologies are going to be trans-dimensional or interdimensional, just by virtue of the fact that if there's any aspiration to go beyond your own solar system, it's extremely unlikely that can happen at the speed of light or less. It's just too slow. So that's where you then cross into this sort of non-locality in physics. And some of the folks I've worked with in classified projects have run labs that deal with the sciences of not necessarily consciousness, but communication, teleportation, transportation, that deal with these trans-dimensional.
If we're able to see into the future, it shows that this consciousness we're talking about has no time. There is no time.
Right.
I was once working with a physicist, and she said, "Can't we do an experiment over the phone to measure the speed of thought?" That's sort of an interesting idea. She was on the East Coast, and I suddenly realized, well, you won't be able to tell whether I start my experiment at 10 o'clock or 2 minutes before 10 or 2 minutes after 10, since you have perfect precognitive abilities. The meaning of the speed of thought is absent.
Right.
That the most common psychic experience that most people have is a precognitive dream.
Yes.
Where you have a dream on Friday night and it comes to pass on Saturday. That is, the elephant in your garden Saturday morning was the cause of your dreaming about an elephant Friday night. Is retrocausal, so that it's really independent of the temporal distance. So I was very impressed, not only to see the UFOs circling around as you wave your laser, that shows that there are UFOs, but it also shows that they have the intentionality of being here and communicating with you. That is, the consciousness that's running these spacecraft also is desirous of communicating.
Right. And they do. And I think this is one of the questions that gets asked a lot, is that what are they waiting for? I think I tell people they're waiting from a response from our species that isn't militarized or violent, but that it's with people who are at least at an initial level aware of the science of consciousness and these other dimensions, because without that, we're not going to be able to understand all the different phenomena at all. Because I think that is as I understand the future, the root science of the next 1,000 years is the science of consciousness. Once we get out of this current conundrum of living like savages using fossil fuels from the dinosaur era. But once we get past that, we'll be able to begin to realize that this is the real pursuit that will be fascinating, not only innate abilities in consciousness, but the scientific applications thereof. And those scientific applications are going to be enormously important going forward 100 years, 1,000 years into the future.
The space entity is probably already caught on the idea that human beings are a very dangerous species. This human beings' first response to seeing a new creature is, you want to know, can I eat it or can I mate with it?
Mm-hmm. Right. Or blow it up in this case. Yeah.
That's right.
And now we have the Space Force out there. So these are all issues that are interrelated. But at the core, this is why what we're trying to do with CE5. And for those listening, there's a new app that just came out called the CE5 Contact app. So if you put in CE5 Contact on your app store things, you'll see it. And it trains people in the meditation, the remote viewing, the protocols. And the reason I think it's important is this sort of mass consciousness effect that's been described, that an individual has a certain effect, but two people doing things in a very unified or loving way is sort of an exponential effect. It's not a linear. So there's an effect in this time-space material world of consciousness, and even more so when there are people connected doing things together and in coherence.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's important. We're accustomed to talking about space and time, but it's very important, the take-home message, to realize that for consciousness, there is no time. Things happen instantaneously. Does not require any time for things to happen in the domain of consciousness.
Right, exactly. That's great. Well, again, we're about out of time. I want to thank you very much for agreeing to be in Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and I want to recommend everyone that they take a look at the Third Eye Spies, a very fascinating historical, but also the information in it that Dr. Russell Targ has touched on is really important for people to understand if they want to do CE5 properly. And I want to thank you for your long career in pursuing this science and taking a very serious scientific approach that connects our time now to the ancient times and the ancient civilizations that live this way as seers, because that's our innate capability.
Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here in support of your wonderful film.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the next one right here on the Best of Dr. Stephen Greer.